If you would this morning, turn back there to that minor prophet by the name of Habakkuk. It's one of the very last books in the Old Testament, and it's an account that we don't talk about very often. He's a minor prophet that's a little bit different than some of the other prophets at his time, although he's close to the end of our actual Old Testament book in the Bible. He's actually quite a bit earlier as far as historical standards are looking at. He's prophesying and he's talking at the same time as men like Jeremiah, who is prophesying the downfall of Israel and Judah by the hands of the Chaldeans. He's prophesying at the same time as Isaiah, who's prophesying the same thing, that the Israelites and Judah's time is at hand. They have become wicked. The Chaldeans, the Babylonians, they're about to come in and they're about to take the people captive. He's prophesying at the same time as Nahum, who is prophesying the downfall of Nineveh at this time because they too have become wicked. Habakkuk, though, is a little bit different. He's not prophesying what's about to come to Judah and what's about to come to Israel. No, Habakkuk is looking at the world that he is living in his time, and he is weeping. He has great sorrow because he sees the wickedness, he sees the evil that is continuing, and really starts off with a prayer and asking God, why would you ever allow this to happen? Have you abandoned God's people to let evil reign? So let's pick up there in chapter 1 and start off with that attitude and see how it changes so much by the time we get to the end of chapter 3. Beginning there in Habakkuk chapter 1, there beginning in verse 1, a burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore, law is powerless. Justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, perverse judgment proceeds. Habakkuk starts crying out and sorrowing to God. God, I look at my country around me, and wickedness is prevailing. God, I look at the visions that you have been sending me, that I have been prophesying, and along with Jeremiah and Isaiah, have been telling the Israelites what's going to come very soon, that they're going to be taken into captivity. But God, I'm looking at the visions that you're sending me, and I see a very wicked people, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, who worship false idols, who slaughter innocent people. They are a wicked people, and you're letting them come in and take us captive? You're letting Nebuchadnezzar and his people come in and wipe us out. Why, God, when I have cried out to you and prayed for help, have we gotten nothing? Many of us, I think, can sympathize with Habakkuk at this point in his life. He's looking at the evil that surrounds him in his own country and in the country that he knows is soon going to invade them. And he's asking the question, God, why have you abandoned us? Why have you allowed sin to rule over righteousness? But God answers Habakkuk beginning there in verse 5. And God answers beginning in verse 5 of Habakkuk 1 saying, look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work in your days, which you would not believe though I told you so. For indeed, I am raising up the Chaldeans. They are a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible. They are dreadful, and their judgment and dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are also swifter than leopards and more fierce even than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. Their captives are like the sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mountains to seize it. Then his mind changes and he transgresses. He commits offense, ascribing the power to his God. God's answer to Habakkuk's first question is, I know who the Chaldeans are. I know who Nebuchadnezzar is. I know the evil that these people are. Habakkuk, I'm working, but it's not in the way you would think, and if I told you, you might not believe me in the state you're in right now. Yes, there is a wicked nation coming to take you captive. Habakkuk, I'll tell you not only their actions, I'll tell you what's in their heart. They lust for blood. They love to conquer other people. Absolutely, they are wicked. They take the power and gifts that I have given them to make them a mighty nation, and they give that credit to their false idols. Habakkuk, I know they're a wicked people. You're not surprising me by telling me these things. But notice how he started his answer. Look and be astounded. I will work in your days in ways which you would not believe, though it were I told you. There is a plan here. I do have a purpose in using them. So Habakkuk again sorrows and cries out to God, Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have anointed them for judgment. O Lord, you have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil. You cannot look on wickedness. Why then do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net. They gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice. They are glad. Therefore, they sacrifice to their net. They burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous. Their food is plentiful. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? God, how could you allow this to happen? Listen, I know we're a wicked people, but we're still better than the Babylonians. We're still better than Nebuchadnezzar at this point. We're still better than the Chaldeans. They rejoice in slaughtering innocent people. You can't stand evil. How could you possibly use them? How could one with such a holy and righteous mindset and attitude and a God who loves justice and mercy use such terrible, wicked people? It's Habakkuk's question. But, chapter 1 there in verse 2, I will stand my watch. I will set myself on the rampart. I will watch and see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I am corrected. Habakkuk is really struggling right now as a prophet of God. As one who is supposed to be bringing God's word to the people, because he's really struggling with this idea that God is not meting out justice in the time, in the manner, and on the people that he thinks should be brought it upon. Habakkuk is really struggling with the idea that God can use wicked people to accomplish his goals. But he also recognizes and humbles himself at the end of his questions to God for this section, saying, You've promised that in my lifetime and in my days, you will work ways in which I will be astounded. You will work justice. You know who is righteous and you know who is false. So I will stand and watch. I will wait and see what you will say. I will wait and see what you will do. And I also know I'm going to be corrected. I know that this mindset is not going to be one that is going to last, because you're going to prove to me by your power and by your answer that we're going to dig into in just a few moments in the rest of chapter 2, how you recognize how righteous and wicked a people are, how God can handle these things, and how he can use anyone for his purpose. Habakkuk starts out this book with a deep place of sorrow, of worry, and concern for his people and for the state of their souls and their country. God rewards his faith by continuing to answer his questions as we continue in chapter 2 there in verse 2. Then the Lord answered me and said, "Write down this vision and make it plain on tablets that he may run who reads it." Habakkuk, I'm going to answer your questions and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to this nation and what's going to happen to those Chaldeans and those Babylonians. So write it down so that the righteous can read these things. God continues on in verse 3. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. Just like he said back in chapter 1, it's not time yet. It's coming soon. I already have a plan, but now is not the time yet. So write down this vision of things that are going to shortly come to pass. But at the end, I will speak and I will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come and it will not tarry. Habakkuk, while it may take time for these things to come into place, because I have a plan and I have a purpose of what's coming soon, it's not ready yet. And take to heart, I'm not holding it back for anyone. I'm waiting for the proper appointed time. Wait and have patience. You will see my glory, my justice, and my decisions come true. Also take heart, as he continues in verse 4. Behold the proud. His soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. I know the difference between who is righteous and who is unrighteous. We're going to see here as we continue on, he's going to have a number of woes here upon the wicked in just a few verses here. God's going to prove here, I know who is wicked among the Chaldeans. I also know who is wicked among the Israelites. Woe to them, their justice for both sides is coming. The righteous will be taken care of. We know from the account we studied a few weeks ago when we studied Daniel. Daniel was one of the ones that was taken captive during this short, soon-to-come-to-pass time that Habakkuk is prophesying about. He was taken care of, along with many other righteous people that either stayed back in Canaan or went into captivity into Babylon. Habakkuk, I know who is righteous and I know who is unrighteous. Make no worries there, but let me tell you what's going to happen to the wicked. He says, woe to those who are prideful. He starts it in verse 4 and continues on down in verse 5 through verse 8. Woe to the prideful, indeed, because he transgresses by wine. He is a proud man. He does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell. He is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers for himself all nations. He heaps up for himself all peoples. Will not all these take up proverb against him, and a taunting riddle against him, and say, woe to him who increases? What is not his, how long? And to him who loads himself up with many pledges, will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will not they awaken and oppress you? And you will become their booty. Because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, and all who dwell on it. He gives a warning here, first and foremost, for Babylon and for the Chaldeans, but also for the Israelites here. God is saying, when I look upon the nations and I see prideful men, I see men who have a lust for conquest, for taking things that is not theirs, by going in by force and conquering people and slaughtering people and stealing from people. Their time is going to come due. Other people will rise up and then conquer them. Justice will be met. The Babylons, first and foremost, have this problem, and make no mistake, while they are coming to conquer you, they'll be taken care of soon enough. Just a couple generations later, they're going to be wiped out. But Habakkuk, your people aren't innocent here either. The Israelites, for generations, have been a prideful people that have conquered, that have stolen, that have ruined other countries around themselves and been infighting and destroying themselves. Their time has come as well. Both nations are about to fall. When you go a little bit further into verse 9, it talks about woe to those who build empires on cruelty. Builds upon this idea in verse 9. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many people, and sin against your own soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Habakkuk, your empire has seen some very cruel kings that have slaughtered children and sacrificed them to false idols. Your empire has seen its people slaughter God's people within itself, and so your empire is coming to an end soon. The Israelites, for the most part, many of them are going to be wiped out, and they're going to be taken away into captivity for a time. But no, that doesn't make the Chaldeans and the Babylonians now more righteous than you, because they've done the same thing. They've been prideful. They've sought evil gain. They've sought to build their own empire on cruelty, on slaughter, on attacking innocent people. Just because they have more power, they think themselves right. Habakkuk, their nation, is going to be wiped out too. Trust me, I see their hearts and I see their people. Continue on a little bit further into chapter 2 and verse 12. It talks about woe to those who build cities with bloodshed. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, it is not of the Lord of hosts. And the people labors to feed the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain. For the earth will be filled and the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea. Listen, your people have done things, Habakkuk, that have not been by my approval. You have slaughtered God's people. Your people have shed innocent blood, and you have built empires and kingdoms and kingships on top of that. I give no approval to that. That was not of my doing. Likewise, Nebuchadnezzar, his forefathers, the Babylonians and the Chaldeans, they have built empires and kingdoms on bloodshed. Yes, ruin is about to come upon these nations, and they're going to conquer each other, they're going to slaughter each other, but at the end of it all, remember, my knowledge and my glory are going to fill the earth. While awful things may be happening soon to come, my will, my glory is going to come out for the better. Continues on there in verse 15. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to the bottle, even to make him drunk, that they may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory, and you also drink. Be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you. The utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you. The plunder of beasts which made them afraid because of men's blood. The violence of the land and the city of all who dwell in it. Habakkuk, again, there are people in your nation and in the Babylonians that have pressed people into further and further wickedness. Men have crept into your kingdom. They have pushed idolatry. They have pushed the slaughter of the innocents. They have slaughtered God's people, his prophets, his priests, and have pushed cruelty, sin, idolatry. I have warned you for generations, and you have not listened. You're not as righteous as you thought you were back in chapter 1. Well, we're righteous, God. Surely we'll never be conquered. No, your kingdom and many of your people are unrighteous. Their time has come to an end. Babylon's time is not yet, but it's coming soon. Justice will be met on both sides. My glory will be glorified. The last of his woes, continuing on in chapter 2 there in verse 18. God says, what profit is an image that its maker should carve it? that molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold shall trust in it to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, awake! To silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in there is no breath at all. But the Lord in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. Isaiah, woe to those in your country that have filled even my own temple with many idols and idol worship. And woe to those that I mentioned a few moments ago among the Chaldeans that give glory and praise to their idols for the ways in which I have blessed them. In any nation, God is saying this is the truth. When a nation becomes so wicked that the majority of them are unrepentant, that generations can be spent trying to bring them back to God, to his word, to his mercy, to his love, and they keep forsaking me, justice will be dealt. My patience, my long-suffering comes to an end. Promises that the wicked in every nation are going to soon be punished. Right now, the Chaldeans and the Babylonians are being used to punish Judah. But they're not going to go unpunished. In the time of Nebuchadnezzar, we've studied that account of Daniel before, and I'm sure we'll study it again. Nebuchadnezzar has dreams about the kingdoms that are going to come after his, and Daniel interprets for him and tells him, Nebuchadnezzar, here's what's going to happen to your people and your kingdom soon enough. Because your people's time comes to an end. In every nation, God says, I can use even the wickedest people to accomplish my will. They can be used to bring forth my glory and spread my name throughout the earth. Habakkuk, write these things down. Let the faithful take heart to these writings. Let the wicked, maybe a few more, turn away from their wickedness, and I'll still be with them. It's a hard question and a subject to study. But when Habakkuk hears these things, he doesn't sorrow, he rejoices. Verse 1 talks about his response being a prayer, and if you skip on down to verse 19, and we'll get there in a few moments, talks about his response also being now a song that he's writing. He's gone from starting off this book in sorrow, weeping in tears for his nation, to now seeing, God, you're right. I waited to be corrected. I stood there and waited for your answer, and you've proven yourselves and reminded me that you know who the wicked are and you know who the righteous are. So, I'm now going to pray to you, and I'm now going to sing to you beginning in verse 2. O Lord, I have heard your speech, and I was afraid. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of your years, make it known, and in wrath, remember mercy. God, the things you are talking about in chapter 2, when you were saying woe to both my nation, to the Chaldeans, and anyone else that would read this in the future, including us here this morning, it terrifies me. But it also gives me heart that you're not going to allow justice and you're not going to allow wickedness to continue unpunished in perpetuity. You do say eventually it has to come to an end and it has to be stopped. And you're right, I was wrong in who I thought was more righteous than someone else, and I'm not looking at it from your perspective, and I'm not looking at people's hearts like you can. So, if you say it's going to come to pass in my lifetime, then let it come swiftly. Let your work be done. Let it revive people around you that you may see you keep your promises. I just pray that in wrath you also remember mercy. Keep in mind your people. Keep in mind those that by seeing your power, your might, and your decisions being made, they might be turned back to you. In Habakkuk's prayer, he's probably thinking mostly about his people right now. I don't think he understood and would come to realize the Chaldeans whose faith would be increased soon enough. I don't think he knew what Nebuchadnezzar would happen to him and his faith by the influence of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't think he would know what happened to the kings after Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians pass away. We studied Daniel in the lion's den a couple of weeks ago. I don't think Habakkuk had any idea what was going to happen in the time of Daniel when he was thrown into the lion's den, that king would rejoice and praise and give honor to God. Yes, in wrath, God remembered mercy. In the time of Esther, a few generations later, and in the time of Nehemiah, in that king, God showed mercy and long-suffering. In multiple kingdoms, both among the Israelites and some of those soon to come to pass, to fall and more to take their place, God would show mercy just as Habakkuk prayed and as he sang. God knows who's wicked. God knows who's righteous. And God is long-suffering to wait for people to change their hearts, to change their souls and return to him. Habakkuk continues by praising God. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens. The earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hands. There his power was hidden. God, I should have known better. You've proven in your creation your power, your might, and your control. I stumbled in my faith for a moment when I thought very poorly that you just allow wickedness to continue and you're going to do nothing to stop it. God, you have proven your might before, and I know you're about to prove it again. God, you have proven your might before when it came to other enemies and other kingdoms that had been wicked. Verse 5, he continues, before you went pestilence, fever followed at his feet. He stood and he measured the earth. He looked and he startled the nations. The everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains and the land of Midian trembled. God, he's talking about mountains and hills here. He's talking about kingdoms here. God, you have been to other kingdoms like Midian, like the Philistines, like the Egyptians. In times past, you have gone to wicked nations and you have made them bow and recognize your power. Even though Israel and Judah's time is at hand to go into captivity, I can take confidence in my prayer and in my song that you're going to prove your power again, and you're not going to allow the Babylonians to be the last kingdom that ever lives on this earth and just be absolutely wicked. I take confidence that you have shown your might before and you will do it again. I take confidence that you will keep your promise. Continuing on in verse 8, O Lord, were you displeased with the rivers? Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea that you rode on your horses and your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows. You divided the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and they trembled, overflowing with waters, and passed by. The deep uttered its voice and lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of your arrows they went, at the shining of your glittering spear. You marched through the land in indignation. You trampled the nations in anger. For you went forth from your people, for salvation with your anointed. You struck the head from the house of the wicked by laying bare from the foundation of the neck. You thrust through with its own arrows the head of its villages. They came out like a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was like feasting and poor in spirit. You walked through the sea with your horses through a heap of great waters. God, over and over again. He's referencing here to different times that God has used Israel to go and conquer their enemies. That he has made the sun stand still when Moses held up his rod. That he has allowed Israel to go and conquer far greater nations than them. when in the time of Saul there were 2 swords in all of Israel, fighting against nations with chariots and bows. God, over and over again, you have proven that you are a God of might, of power, of mercy, and when you have promised, you have fulfilled. As terrifying as the days about to come will be for this nation, I'm going to take confidence in the things that you say. When I heard, my body trembled. My lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble, when he comes upon the people, and he will invade them with his troops. Though the fig trees may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herds in the stalls, God, I know the things that are about to come are going to be terrifying and world-shaking. Even more so for people that do not listen to you, that you have promised that these things are coming. God, I tremble and I am terrified of what is about to come. Yet, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like the deer's feet. He will make me to walk on high hills. God is terrifying, as nation and earth shattering as the things that are about to occur are. I can still praise you. I can still recognize that you are the one in control. That you are the one with power. That wickedness is not going to win when the Babylonians come in and conquer my people. That wasn't Satan's doing. That was you using Satan's people to accomplish your will. In that I will rejoice. The book of Habakkuk is very much that idea of turning sorrow, of turning doubt, of turning fear by looking to God's answers, by praying to Him, by examining His Word, by hearing what He has to say on these subjects, and changing our mindset into praise and into song. It doesn't mean it makes the fear vanish. It doesn't mean the tribulations that may come soon aren't real and they're not terrifying, that they're not going to affect our friends, our family, maybe our world, maybe our nation, depending on what may happen when a nation turns its back on God. But it's a promise to the faithful that God is the one still in control, that He raises up nations and He brings them down, that He knows the hearts of men, that He can take wicked men and He can use them. He knows that He can take men like Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians and accomplish His will. But the wicked are still going to be judged. The titular verse I really think there is in Habakkuk 2 there in verse 4. Behold the proud, and his soul is not upright in him. And then continues on for the rest of the chapter saying, woe to him. Woe, what is about to befall him. I know who the wicked are in each and every nation. And if they do not turn back to me, they're going to be judged and they're going to meet the punishment that they have chosen. At the same time, the just shall live by faith. I recognize who the righteous people are in every nation. Habakkuk, I've not forgotten you. I know that you're still my prophet. I know that you're still trying to serve me, that even now you're praying to me, asking me for wisdom, asking me for guidance, asking what's going on. I'm not going to forget you as the Babylonians come in to conquer. I'm not going to forget Isaiah. I'm not going to turn my back on Jeremiah. Nahum is not going to be forgotten Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, other many righteous people that are about to be taken into captivity, I will still take care of them. I will still watch over my people. I call on you and I call on them, and I ask you to relay this message to them. Remain righteous, remain faithful. The reality is, in this country, there are righteous people and there are wicked people. The reality is, in this country will not last forever. No nation ever has. There's a lot of turmoil this week around the elections. Donald Trump is a wicked and sinful man. God has used him for 4 years to accomplish his will. Joe Biden is a wicked and sinful man. I have faith and trust that God can use him. I'm not terrified and worried about what's going to happen to this country. I've seen many of my brethren and many of our friends and our family and our loved ones that their faith is being shaken this week. They're concerned about what's going to happen to this country. They're concerned about the faith of people and where this is going to lead. We need to take confidence in our God that He is in control, that He will take care of His people, and that you and I need to remain faithful. Just because there is suffering in this world, in this country, does not mean that God has stopped caring. God has a plan. It just may not be going in the time and in the manner that you and I think it should be. Again, read Habakkuk 2 and verse 3 again. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. At the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come and it will not tarry. God has made an even more powerful promise to you and I, that heaven is coming. That not just this nation, this entire world, this entire universe is going to come to an end. When the world becomes so wicked that I say enough is enough, it's time to call my faithful and my children home. It is time for Judgment Day. It is time for the sorrow and suffering to end. God prophesied through Habakkuk, through Jeremiah, through Isaiah, that the captivity will end. It's coming, but there is an end to that suffering. There's suffering going on in the world and even in this week in this our country. But that too will come to an end. God is in control and God will take care of these things. And that I need to rejoice and I need to keep the faith. The end of chapter 3 there in verse 17 down through verse 19. Again, Habakkuk talks about the idea, though the flocks be slaughtered and there's nothing to eat. Though the fields stop yielding and our country be in disarray economically, physically, spiritually, we're being assaulted on all sides. In verse 18, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet. He will make me walk on the high hills. To the chief musician with my stringed instruments. This prayer and this song that Habakkuk has just written is both to encourage himself and to encourage his people. It's no wonder that the Hebrew writer quoted Habakkuk here in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 35. If you'll turn there, that'll be our last passage this morning, and then the lesson will be yours. In Hebrews chapter 10, beginning in verse 35, a very similar situation is going on. Christians are being persecuted. They're in turmoil. Nero and men like him are in power, hunting and slaughtering God's people. Wicked people attacking God's people was not the first time it happened in the book of Habakkuk. In the time of Hebrews, it's not going to be the last time that God's people are going to face persecution. that countries and that people are going to face sorrow and they're going to be in doubt, wondering, why would God allow this to happen? The message from the Hebrew writer also borrows from that book of Habakkuk. Beginning in verse 35, "Therefore, do not cast away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive a promise. For yet a little while, and he is coming, who will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith, but if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him." Brethren, we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. It's the end of chapter 10 as it leads into the hall of faith and gives examples of men like Habakkuk who have stood still and watched in some of the most perilous times in history and remembered it's time to leave it in God's hands. Brethren, it's a powerful message that we can take the sorrow, that we can take the doubt, that we can take the worry, and we can turn it into praise and remembering confidence that God is the one in control. Paul remembered Habakkuk's faith. Peter remembered Habakkuk's faith. The Hebrew writer remembered Habakkuk's faith, and others like them in times of peril. In our lifetime, we need to take example and lessons from him. Don't spend your life in despair as Christians. We don't sorrow as those who have no hope. We have a promise that whatever comes, we have a home waiting for us that we never have to worry about these things again for eternity. So pray for endurance, pray for patience, and pray to be able to turn these times into praise that God is in control no matter what comes. I haven't talked about much of what it needs to do in order to be a Christian this morning, but we have talked about that blessing there, that we can have the answers of why God allows certain things to happen, that we can have the confidence that He is the one in control, and we have the promise written down for us that we have a wonderful home and blessing awaiting for us for all of eternity. That we have someone like Habakkuk that we can turn to in times of peril and lean on and cast our cares upon Him. You want access to those blessings, then start this morning, if you are not one, by becoming a Christian. Confess Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Turn back from the wickedness and the sin that you have been living in and be baptized as He commands. We'll rejoice this morning if you need to take care of that this morning and that needs to be done. If you are a Christian like Habakkuk this morning that has been struggling with this world, with this sorrow, whether it's personal with yourself, your family, or your loved ones, whether it's around this country and this world, whatever the case is, and you've let that sorrow and that weakness and that fear start to take over, then pray to God and ask Him for help. If you need the encouragement of the brethren, bring it to our attention and we will happily do what we can. If there's been sin that has come into your life, pray to God and ask Him for forgiveness. If it's public in a way that it has brought shame upon the name of Christ and the name of the church here at Tallmadge, then come forward and confess those things this morning. We will pray with you and we will help you in any way that we can. Whatever the case may be this morning, please come forward now if it calls for it, as together we stand and sing this song that has been selected.